He thought it was just another act of kindness, paying for a stranger's coffee because her card got declined. She looked tired, embarrassed, and quiet, like someone struggling to get through the day. What he didn't know was that the woman he just helped was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, disguised, on purpose, for a reason that would flip his entire life upside down. It was just past 8:30 in the morning when Darren walked into the Mug Tree Cafe, a small independent coffee shop on the corner of Chestnut and 9th. The place had this warm, homey smell of cinnamon and roasted espresso beans that wrapped around him like a blanket. He came here every morning before work. Black coffee, no cream, no sugar. Simple, just like the rest of his life. As he waited in line, his eyes caught a woman in front of him. She stood out, not because she was dressed in anything flashy, but because she wasn't. Faded jeans, an oversized hoodie, and old sneakers. She looked like she hadn't slept well in days. He noticed how she nervously clutched her phone, checking it repeatedly, then sighed quietly as she reached the register. "1 medium caramel latte and a butter croissant, please," she said softly. The cashier rang her up. She handed over a black card, one of those fancy-looking metal ones. But when the machine beeped and declined, her shoulders stiffened. The cashier looked up awkwardly. "Do you have another card, ma'am?" The woman fumbled through her bag, avoiding eye contact with the growing line behind her. Darren saw the tension in her jaw, the humiliation she was trying so hard to swallow. That's when he stepped forward without hesitation. "I got it," he said, pulling out his own card. The woman turned to him, eyes wide. "Oh, no, that's really not necessary." "Don't worry about it. Happens to the best of us," Darren said with a kind smile. She hesitated, then gave him a weak thank you. Darren paid, grabbed his coffee, and walked out like nothing had happened. What he didn't know, what no one in that coffee shop knew, was that the woman's name was Keisha Rowe. She was the CEO of Rotech, a billion-dollar AI firm that quietly powered some of the largest logistics companies in the U.S. Her net worth, somewhere north of $200 million. The card hadn't been declined due to insufficient funds. It was declined because she had canceled it intentionally. Keisha had spent the last few months undercover, visiting ordinary neighborhoods, living in average motels, wearing thrift store clothes, and watching how the world treated her when she looked like nothing. She had grown tired of the boardrooms, the fake compliments, and the rehearsed respect that followed her money. What she longed to know, truly know, was whether kindness still existed when status didn't. Whether people helped without an agenda. And in that little coffee shop, Darren just gave her an answer. Later that afternoon, Keisha sat alone in her rented Ford Fusion in the parking lot of a community park, watching kids play. She sipped the very coffee Darren had paid for. Her phone buzzed with dozens of missed calls and emails. Her assistant, her lawyer, her executive team. She ignored them all. Instead, she tapped on her notes app and typed, "Man at the Mug Tree. Tall, early 30s, quiet eyes, kind smile, bought coffee for a stranger, deserves better than what he has." The next day, Keisha returned to the same cafe at the same time. She wore the same hoodie and jeans. And sure enough, Darren was there. Same routine, same corner seat near the window. He didn't see her at first, but when their eyes met, she smiled and nodded. He nodded back, and just like that, the game had begun. But it wasn't a game for Darren. It would soon become something much more. A chance at a life he never thought he'd have. A test of who he truly was when the truth came crashing down. Keisha knew exactly who he was now. The question was, did he? Keisha kept returning to the cafe. Every morning, without fail, she showed up in the same worn hoodie, ordering the same caramel latte and butter croissant. Darren began to notice. Not in a romantic way at first, but in that curious, cautious way you notice someone who doesn't quite fit into the scenery. She never made phone calls. She rarely looked at her phone. She just sat there, sipping slowly, sometimes staring out the window, sometimes watching people pass by like she was reading their lives without a word. One Thursday morning, as Darren stirred a packet of sugar into his coffee, he finally spoke. "You always order the same thing," he said casually. She looked up and smiled. "Creatures of habit?" "Right," he chuckled. "Fair enough. I'm Darren, by the way." "Keisha," she replied. "Thanks again for the other day." "You don't owe me thanks," he said, waving it off. "People help when they can. You'd do the same." But Keisha tilted her head. "You say that like it's normal. Isn't it?" "No," she said, her voice softening. "Not anymore." Darren didn't respond right away. He just nodded slowly, sipping his coffee, letting the silence sit comfortably between them. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed, was that Keisha had a dossier on him now. She had pulled up everything: his resume, his last known employment, even his high school grades. She knew he had once been an aspiring engineer, brilliant with numbers and mechanical systems, but gave it all up after his mother's cancer diagnosis. He'd taken care of her full-time until she passed. His dreams died with her. Now, he worked at a hardware store 4 blocks away from the cafe. Minimum wage, no benefits, no recognition. But still, he smiled at strangers. He helped the elderly carry bags. He paid for a stranger's coffee without a second thought. Keisha couldn't stop thinking about him, not because she was falling for him, but because he reminded her of who she used to be. Before the cameras, before the fake smiles, before the boardrooms and investors and journalists, before the world started praising her title and ignoring her soul, she began testing him. One day, she, accidentally, dropped her wallet under the table. Darren picked it up without hesitation and didn't even glance inside before handing it back. Another day, she left her phone charging at her seat while going to the restroom. When she returned, it was untouched. He'd placed a napkin over it for privacy, but what really caught her heart, what shook her to the core, was something much simpler. It was raining that day, pouring. Darren came in soaked, having walked the full 20 minutes from his tiny studio apartment because the buses were delayed. He didn't complain. He just shook off the water, ordered his coffee, and sat down. Keisha quietly slid a folded umbrella across the table toward him. "You look like you could use this," she said. He smiled, and then something unguarded flickered in his eyes. "Why are you nice to me?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "Because you were kind first." "That's not how it works for most people," he said, laughing lightly. "Usually kindness is currency. You spend it if you're expecting something back." Keisha's eyes narrowed. "I'm not most people." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, a bit of suspicion curled around his gaze, like he was realizing that she wasn't quite who she pretended to be. "Who are you really, Keisha?" he asked. She didn't flinch. She didn't lie. But she didn't tell him everything either. Someone trying to remember what it means to be human. He didn't push further. That night, Keisha sat in her motel room, lights dimmed, laptop open. She pulled up an email draft she'd been working on for weeks. The subject line read, "Proposal for Darren Wetaker, Project Restart." She hovered over the send button. Her thumb trembled. He hadn't asked for help. He didn't even know he needed it, but if he accepted it, nothing in his life would stay the same. Keisha leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in months, she felt uncertain. This man wasn't like the others. He wasn't dazzled by money. He wasn't desperate. He was honest. And honesty like that, it was rare. Too rare to manipulate, which meant if she did this, if she revealed who she truly was, it had to be for the right reasons, not guilt, not pity, not control. Respect. She looked back at the screen, eyes locked on Darren's name. Then she clicked Save Draft. The truth would come soon. But first, she had to be sure that Darren would still see her. Not the CEO, not the wealth, not the title, but her for who she was when she had nothing. Because sometimes, the greatest test isn't what someone does when you have everything to offer, but how they treat you when they think you have nothing at all. The next morning, Darren didn't show up. Keisha waited in her usual seat for nearly an hour, sipping her latte, barely tasting it. She told herself it was fine, that maybe he had taken a day off or overslept. But deep down, an uneasy feeling started to grow. By noon, she was walking down the narrow streets near the hardware store where Darren worked. It wasn't her usual route, but that day, she didn't care. She needed to see him, not just to satisfy her curiosity. It was more than that now. He mattered to her in a way that scared her. Not romantically, but spiritually, like he was a mirror to her better self. The store door chimed as she entered. The guy at the counter barely looked up. "Is Darren in today?" she asked, trying to sound casual. The employee looked confused. "Darren. Oh, didn't you hear? His landlord evicted him. Something about late rent. He's been couch surfing the past week. I think he's staying with a buddy near Franklin Avenue." Keisha's heart dropped. She didn't ask more. She just nodded, said thank you, and walked out into the midday sun, feeling like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Darren had once told her about his mother's final months, how he worked part-time jobs and still couldn't afford the hospital bills. After she died, he used whatever savings he had left to pay off debts, refusing to let her memory be tainted by collection calls. He had nothing left. No family. No backup plan. Just stubborn dignity. And now even that was slipping away. Keisha sat in her car for nearly an hour before pulling up the draft email she had saved the night before. She changed the subject line to just one word, offer, and then she hit send. She didn't expect a reply, but 2 hours later her phone buzzed. It was from Darren. "Is this a scam or some kind of joke?" She responded immediately. "Neither. Please meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Mug Tree. I'll explain everything." He showed up the next day, but his eyes weren't kind this time. They were sharp. Guarded. He sat across from her without ordering anything. "You're not who you said you were." "I never said who I was," she replied gently. "You let me believe things about you that weren't true. I needed to know how people treated me without my name, without my wealth." Darren shook his head. "So I was a test." "You were a revelation," she said softly. "And I'm not here to patronize you, Darren. I'm here because you reminded me what it's like to feel real again. What it means to be good without reason." He looked away, silent. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Inside is a formal offer. A position at Rotec, my company. You have the skills." I checked. "Engineering, mechanical diagnostics, systems design. You were born for it." "I haven't touched a circuit board in years," he muttered. "I'll pay for any certifications, relocation, a signing bonus. Everything. You'll never have to walk in the rain to a minimum wage job again." Darren stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," Keisha said. "And because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it." He finally looked at her. "I didn't ask for this." "I know. That's what makes you the only person I'd trust to accept it." There was silence again, heavy and full. Then Darren spoke. "I need to think." "Take your time," she replied, standing. "The offer stands as long as you need." She left the envelope on the table and walked out, her heart pounding. Not from fear, but from hope. Hope that he'd choose something better. Hope that he'd trust her again. That night, Darren opened the envelope. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a handwritten letter. "When you paid for my coffee, you didn't just show kindness. You restored something I'd forgotten. Humanity without price tags. I don't want to change your life. I want to offer you the tools to change your own. If you ever decide to say yes, I'll be waiting. Keisha Rowe." He folded the letter quietly and looked around his temporary room, lit by a flickering lamp and surrounded by cardboard boxes that held everything he owned. For the first time in years, he saw a future that didn't look like survival. It looked like purpose. The next morning, Keisha was already at the cafe when he walked in. He didn't say anything. He just sat down beside her and slid the envelope back. This time, opened, with his signature on the contract inside. She didn't speak either. They just sat there, sharing the silence, sipping coffee that didn't taste like just coffee anymore. It tasted like something else. Like change. 3 months later, Darren stood in front of a 12-foot glass wall, staring out over the skyline of a city he used to only see on postcards. His ID badge hung from a lanyard around his neck. Darren Whittaker, Jr., Systems Engineer, Rotec Industries. The office buzzed around him. Clean desks, smartboards, screens that stretched across entire walls. Men and women in tailored suits tapped away at sleek laptops, solving problems he once thought were beyond his reach. But now they called him teammate. They asked him for input. He was one of them. More importantly, he belonged. His first few weeks were rocky. The transition from selling nails at a hardware store to handling $1 million AI logistics systems wasn't easy. He had to study late into the night, fail, relearn, adjust, and fail again. But Keisha never let him fall alone. Every evening, she'd check in, quietly, privately. No CEO talk, just honest mentorship. "You're not here to impress me," she once told him. "You're here to rebuild you." And he did. Piece by piece, confidence returned. Not arrogance, not ego, just the quiet, grounded kind that comes when you've been tested by life and survived. One Friday evening, long after the rest of the office had cleared out, Darren found Keisha still at her desk, her screen glowing with rows of spreadsheets. "Still working?" he asked. She smiled without looking up. You know how it is. CEOs never sleep. He walked in and placed a cup of coffee beside her. Black. No cream, no sugar. Like you like it. She looked up, surprised. You remembered. He nodded. You're not the only one who observes things quietly. They sat in silence for a moment. The office was calm, peaceful. I never did ask, he said finally. That day, the coffee shop. Did you know your card would be declined? Keisha smiled. Let's just say I had a feeling. He laughed softly. So the whole thing was a setup. No, she said. The coffee wasn't, but the card was. And you were really just watching people. I needed to remember what it felt like to be ignored, or helped, or judged. I needed to see who people were when they thought I had nothing. Darren looked down at his hands. And you picked me. No, she corrected. You chose yourself. I just noticed. That night, as Darren left the building, he passed a janitor struggling with a cleaning cart stuck in the elevator door. Without hesitation, Darren stepped in, helped guide it through, and nodded kindly before walking away. Keisha, watching from the glass above, smiled. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the job. It wasn't the title. What she'd given him was a reminder of his own worth, one he'd buried beneath years of quiet suffering. And now he was giving that back to the world. A week later, Keisha sat at a press conference. Her company had just announced a new initiative, Project Groundrise, an internal program to recruit talented individuals from overlooked backgrounds, people who had the skills but not the paperwork, the streets but not the spotlight. When asked what inspired it, Keisha paused. Then, with a small smile, she said, A man once paid for my coffee when he thought I couldn't afford it. He didn't know who I was, didn't ask, didn't expect anything in return. He reminded me what leadership actually means. The story went viral overnight. But the best part, Darren never chased the spotlight. While the world praised him, he stayed quiet, focused, grateful. And every Sunday morning, without fail, he returned to the Mug Tree Cafe. Same seat, same black coffee. Sometimes he'd pay for a stranger's drink when their card didn't go through. Not because he had to, because he remembered how it felt to be seen. So if you're watching this and thinking your small act of kindness won't matter, think again. Sometimes it's not just coffee, it's a door, a future, a second chance. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that goodness still exists in the world, don't forget to subscribe to Live Truths, where stories like this come to life and remind us what humanity looks like.